Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another virtual event, a tour of Neighbors, The Neighbors, Slideshows of America. It's an exhibition curated by Christian Viveros-Faune. We've already opened it, and tonight will be a virtual tour. 5 artists were invited by Christian to document their perspective on this moment. With a conflation of pandemics, the moment seems ever more challenging with continuing concern over the COVID epidemic, racial unrest, I'm losing my train of thought here. As the death rate continues to climb for COVID, it affects the economy and getting back our students back to school. And now I'm thinking also of the climate change and the huge fires out in California, which is my home state. So while each of these artists has documented very intimately their neighborhoods or what they're familiar with, we really have a surprisingly beautiful exhibition that seems very much of the moment. The artists are Woodland Cadet, Guy Greenberg, Corinne Haddelberg, Katya Maria Landeros, and Zora Muroff. And they're all depicting different aspects, different neighborhoods of American life. Each of these artists was given a stipend or a commission fee in order to produce the body of work. And we're very thankful to the Andy Warhol Foundation for funding this particular exhibition, along with Stanton Store Embrace the Arts Foundation. So we could really offer each of these artists a commission fee in order to produce a new body of work. We also invite you always to go to our website where you can get more detail about all of our events and learn about each exhibition in some depth and actually review past conversations for Life During Wartime and the Neighbors Slideshows of America. The Neighbors exhibition has 2 facets to it, which Christian will be talking about, the virtual component as well as the slide component. This is an amazing series of projects that the Contemporary Art Museum staff have developed on Zoom. And I'm very, very grateful to Noelle Smith's leadership and Don Fuller, our new media curator, and Mark Fredericks, and a wonderful assistant who helps us with each of these. Tonight, Ashley Jablonski is playing backup, and David Waterman is going to manage the question and answer period. So the whole team at Contemporary Art Museum, I should even mention Tony Palms, who located all of the slide projectors that are part of the physical exhibition. So you'll learn more about that in a moment. So please follow us tonight on Facebook live streaming and ask your questions on that format, or put questions as you're listening to Christian talk about the show into the chat on the Zoom, into the Zoom chat box. And then Dave Waterman will synthesize those towards the end of the conversation tonight. So welcome, and it's my pleasure now to introduce Christian Viveros-Faune. Christian?
Hi, thank you, Margaret. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first virtual tour of the Neighbors, Slideshows for America. As you can tell by now, this tour is unlike any tour previously held at USF CAM. In fact, it's unlike any tour I've ever done. It is, as you can plainly see, a virtual tour, which is obviously entirely apropos since the exhibition is, to date, mostly virtual. Despite being physically installed in the museum galleries are temporarily closed in order to promote best practices with regard to public health and compliance with the University of South Florida closures. That said, as Margaret mentioned, we're presently allowing entry into the galleries for students and members of the university community by prior appointment. So if you can, please take advantage of this you will, I guarantee you, be richly rewarded by this exhibition. Obviously, when we originally conceived of the show, no one envisioned where we'd be today, not as a planet or a country, and certainly not as a museum. We didn't know, we couldn't really have imagined that we wouldn't be able to walk around objects in public space with like-minded, art-loving folks. But currently, this is about 7 months into our lockdowns, our respective lockdowns. Society at large rightly sort of demands that we significantly limit our ability to be present at mass gatherings and cultural events like gallery and museum exhibitions. That goes for cities like Tampa and Los Angeles and New York, where I'm speaking to you from, and many other cities, in fact, all cities across the United States and most around the world. In spite of these circumstances, these peculiar circumstances, and actually in no small measure because of these circumstances, USF-CAM made a decision to push on with this exhibition and others well into the new year, that we plan well into 2021. But in the case of the neighbors, we sort of like decided to really double down on our effort to bring you this very important show of 5 US-based photographic artists. What we've done here in terms of the installation, in terms of our presentation, as you'll see in a moment, is, I don't know, cover our bases, as it were. We physically installed the show inside the galleries while making sure to bring you, our virtual audience, a digital capture of both the installation and the discrete works that comprise it. You'll see what I mean as we go forward. Why have we done this? Well, to take a phrase from Winston Churchill, because a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, especially at times when there are opportunities to be had, like now, right? By installing the work in the museum's galleries and developing a robust online presence for this show and others, we'd like to think that we're also getting a jump on what will be, going forward, a hybrid model for museum exhibitions. This model will rely on both a traditional physical installation and a strong online presence as parallel and mutually complementary efforts. Around the country and around the world, leading arts institutions have had to learn the lessons of virtual exhibition making quickly. Lesson number 1 is that virtual programming, while not a replacement for live and in-person encounters, is substantially real. It's real. We're talking here, right? You're listening to me. And I'll be listening to you when we take questions. And that reality is sort of underscored even more so in the absence of actual physical meetings, right? Put differently, what museums have learned recently is what a lot of other cultural entities, among them, I don't know, gaming companies and social media companies, have known for a long, long time. So it's about time we got slightly hipper to the virtual possibilities. Before I dive into talking about the work of the 5 artists that make up the exhibition, and maybe I'll ask Mark now to actually pull up the site and we can scroll through it so you see what the platform looks like. I want to point to a 6th and very important contribution to the show that's also available on the show's homepage. You can find it on the museum website, ira.usf.edu. What I'm talking about, of course, is the terrific essay written by Lisa Sutcliffe. She is the Hertzfield Curator of Photography and Media Arts at the Milwaukee Art Museum. Lisa's a terrific curator and really a terrific writer. And she not only contributed a seminal text for the show, but she also generously talked me through a rough sketch of the show, as I had at the time, and also, frankly, introduced me to the work of several of the artists who are in the exhibition. I can't really stress how invaluable her help and advice was. Again, the text is beautiful. So please consider reading it. If the initial idea for the show could have once been considered timely, and I say this because it was originally scheduled for January 2021. It was supposed to be a postmortem on the presidential election in November, the show, The Neighbors, right? Then, holding it in the midst of, what's the most volatile presidential election season in, certainly my memory, I think most people's memory. Moving that exhibition up from, say, the slot in January 2021 to September 2020 might seem a little risky, maybe even a little foolish. But I have to say, when I asked the artists whether they were down with such a move, they all sort of immediately jumped on board and assured me that it was a good idea. I think the resoluteness really sort of speaks to the belief these artists have in images in general, and photographic image, but most specifically their images, right? As displayed or projected, as you'll see on the museum's walls, they're carefully constructed and sequenced images, and the sequencing is really fundamental here. Speaks to difficult times, but not only to that, but also to a desire to answer really a fundamental question raised by this show in particular. And that question is, what does America look like? And even more to the point, who is and who isn't an American? Which brings me finally to talk a little about the show itself. The idea behind The Neighbors is pretty simple. USF Can commissioned 5 brilliant but very different camera artists from around the US, and they are, as Margaret mentioned, Woodland Cadet, Guy Greenberg, Curran Haddelberg, Katya Maria Landeros, and Zora J. Murph. We commissioned them to make slideshows of groups of Americans whom they believe are routinely underexposed. These are folks whose bodies and faces go unseen, so that they are often uncounted or undercounted now that we're thinking census, right? And underserved by society at large. Rather than focus on images of groups of outliers per se, what the exhibition brief really asked them to do, these artists, were to concentrate on Americans of every stripe, but with a focus on those who appear underrepresented by the country's dominant narratives. That, in brief, explains the title of the exhibition. So now for the subtitle, right? Slideshows for America. What's that about? Why slideshows? Part of the answer has to do with wanting to do a stripped down show that gets to the essence of photography, which of course is the practice and sometimes the art of creating durable images by recording light. We wanted to do this at a time when the facts purportedly communicated by photographs and videos are, shall we say, under fire. Another partial answer is that we wanted to harken back to an earlier age of old-time slide projectors and slide carousels, because that's what we used to basically put together this exhibition, to evoke the immediacy of family, and also the community slideshows of another age. In an important way, this show is also, well, is really kind of stripped down to the max. It's conceived in the spirit of Mies van der Rohe's minimalist dictum, less is more. The Neighbors is made up of 2 basic elements. These are images distilled into light projections and the sounds the projectors make as they move through the stories these 5 artists tell in their sequences of images. These distinct stories, as we mentioned, are meant to defy narratives that describe entire swathes of the country as monoliths or blocks. Think red states, blue states, among other kinds of divisions, right? Or monolithic blocks. If each slideshow contains images that suggest that parts of the country are broken, others highlight the stubborn human values of the communities they portray. Perseverance, patience, bravery, quiet resistance, even joy. By way of closing, and before giving you a peek at a video of the installation inside the galleries, I want to read a paragraph from the essay Lisa Sutcliffe wrote for the show. I think it summarizes the spirit of the show particularly well. For the neighbors, Sutcliffe writes, USF CAM invited a group of US-based photographers to offer an interpretation of our moment, of the Americans who might otherwise go unseen. The exhibition's title suggests a gathering of familiar people, but who are hazily defined. Together they make a community, a society, a country. These photographs provide sketches, diaries, and snapshots, offering fresh perspectives and providing a richer and more complex depiction of American life. Observing is an important part of listening, of understanding. These sequences of images are an invitation to recognize and appreciate the ways in which a diverse set of hearts and minds have reacted to and reflected upon our common society at this unusual time. Mark, let's go ahead and cue the installation video. Now, before we press play, I want to encourage all of you, hang on, Mark, to replay this video and the video captures of the individual artists' projections that we'll look at in a minute, but I want you to do it in a particular way. I want you to blow up the screen large. I want you to turn up the sound. I want you to turn out the light in your respective living rooms, kitchens, your bedrooms, wherever it is that you're watching this, wherever it is that you're looking at this and listening to me. Now I want you to concentrate. And I want you to think about that magical sentence Lisa Sutcliffe wrote. Observing is an important form of listening, of understanding. Now imagine yourself sitting alongside others watching images of your extended family, your very extended family, right? Those are your parents, your sisters, your brothers, your uncles, your aunts, your cousins, and of course, the neighbors. At times, you may think you've got absolutely nothing to do with them, but in every case, you do. All right, so in the pardon our appearance pardon me, in the Pardon Our Appearance department, you will excuse the metal chairs, the metal folding chairs that are in there. Those are actually set up for visits for anyone who actually makes an appointment to go into the museum. Clearly, you have to be socially distanced. Otherwise, we would have set up benches, nice looking benches. In that event, let's move forward. Obviously, what I can't do today with you guys is to physically stroll over to sort of usher you in and physically stroll over to the artist's works and talk about the projections in person. We're clearly not doing that. But maybe what we can do, or rather what we will do, is to have you look at the individual artist slideshows via this method while I tell you a little about the artists themselves. We're going to do that, mind you, in the order in which the work is actually displayed. So we're going to start at the East Gallery, which is the bigger gallery in the museum, and start with the first projection as you walk into that space, which is Zora J. Murph's. Mark, can you cue and play the video capture of Zora's projection as that goes, as we unspool that, and it's just 20 images. I will talk over it when I think it's appropriate, and give you my insights on what I think Zora was looking to do, both in terms of the contribution, but both in terms of the specific images he contributed in this slideshow, and also maybe in terms of the sequencing. I'll start actually by telling you who Zora is. Zora J. Murph lives and works in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Obviously, he's a photographer, where he serves as an assistant professor of art at the University of Arkansas. Zora is a distinguished voice in photography, dealing with the complex intersections of race and American society, and has long combined his experience with social work. He worked briefly with incarcerated youth and his art to explore the fraught connections between visibility and powerful social systems. This particular image is one that Lisa Sutcliffe refers to. She was wondering whether those children would frolic in the same way with that statue of a white man in Detroit. I've actually forgotten exactly who it is today, and the answer is probably not. One thing you'll notice in this carousel of images is that Zora tends to mix both found images, like the one you previously saw, and ones he's taken, like this one. Zora, in this particular slideshow, which by the way is of 20 images, it's nice and tight, right? That image, the image that we're looking at now, that American flag on a porch seeing through the wood, is one that acts as a sort of colophon. It interrupts the slideshow several times. You come back to it and back to it and back to it again. So I was saying he works with both found images and images he's taken himself. That image in particular is an image, if I remember correctly, of his old home in Omaha, Nebraska, I think. This is not a fashion show shoot. There is a ankle bracelet on that young man's ankle. And the idea of looking at built structures, suburban built structures, the way that Zora is looking at them and coming back to them, in the way that he comes back to this photograph, reads, I think can read like a commentary about what the African American experience lacks. There's a history of redlining I think we can talk about, right? But also, you know, the view from the interior seems to me to be also the view of like a child in the suburbs, that's sneaking into construction underway. And we come back to that image again and again, right? The American flag through the wood. And that's the last image on this particular carousel, and then we loop back. The slideshow, Zora's slideshow, is titled Exceptionalism as a Belief System for Erasing Oneself, which I think clearly speaks to the ideal, the American ideal of exceptional, of American exceptionalism, manifest destiny, but also exceptionalism as it applies to the African American experience, which is not exactly protected by standard issue exceptionalism, the kind of exceptionalism folks who are not hued darkly get to take advantage of. That's, in fact, that's at least historically how it's been. A couple of other thoughts about Zora's slideshow and about Zora in general. Zora began working as a photographer when he took a position with the Iowa Juvenile Detention and Diversion Services Facility in 2012. He began to take portraits of a lot of the kids that he was working with. One of the interesting things there is that he couldn't take, though he was making portraits, he couldn't take pictures of their faces because, of course, they're minors, and so they're protected by law. They couldn't be exposed. So he found very interesting ways to get around that prohibition to capture the essential character to the degree that he could of the encounter or of those particular youth. And that sort of set him on. One other thing I want to say about him is that in 2015, he co-founded Strange Fire Collective, which has as its mission to highlight the work of women, people of color, and queer and trans artists. Basically it's a photographic collective, and it's really terrific. And I have to say that in looking at Zora's work over the last few months and getting into it and speaking to him, I've really come to believe that he's really one of the best photographers out there working today. So let's move on to the work of Katya Maria Landera, someone who's no less impressive, frankly. Katya, and I'll start giving you her brief bio, is a Mexican-American photographer. He's also an educator. I believe she's at Wellesley College right now, also a Guggenheim Fellow. And she's influenced by her bicultural upbringing and has really focused over the last decade or so on Latinx communities and their history, particularly their history of migration, their representation, and their sense of belonging, specifically to American society. She spent, I think, to kick off basically her career, a couple of years living in Mexico while documenting communities, or a specific community, a couple of communities in Mexico that had the highest rate of historic northward migration. So those are communities that have been fully transformed through a whole century of migration to the U.S. Katya's slideshow is 40 images. I encourage you virtually to virtually or physically visit all 40. We're going to do half of them because otherwise we'd be here until about 8 o'clock. And aside from being a terrific slideshow and a terrific story that she tells through these images, because really this is, I think, what the slideshows are about, right? These sequences are stories that the photographers are telling. I also want to point out that she has concentrated on communities, Latino communities, from Northern California up through Oregon and up through Washington. Many of these communities exist very proximate to farms, right? Fruit and almond farms, apparently. Many of these communities, Katya has told me, are upwards of 70 or 80% Latino. Some of them, like this picture that you're looking at now, some of these pictures look like they could have been taken in certain parts of Mexico or somewhere south of the border, right? Yet they are very much American. So again, we ask ourselves, who are these people, right? Are they American? Where are these towns? And when we realize that they are very much north of the border, very much in America, then the subsequent questions are, well, you know, if this is what America looks like, maybe we should reconsider our mental image map of America. Think about the idea of neighbors again, right? These are neighbors to themselves. I love this picture in particular, and I'm hoping we're going to get to one picture of a young woman. These landscapes, I think, are absolutely gorgeous. And they sort of redraw what, I mean, this looks like the Old West, and so does this, but who's populating these images, right? You'd expect to see white folk with cowboy hats, and that's not quite what you're getting. As I was saying, there's one picture in particular that just really throws me, and it's a picture of and I hope we get to it, and if not, you guys have to go back and find it, of a young girl holding a sparkler, because it's 4th of July, and I believe the caption on the photograph actually says that it's 4th of July, and I'm not quite sure if it's because she looks so tremendously bored, but it's an image that's really sort of stayed with me, because it speaks both to youth and possibility, and also to a certain kind of exhaustion of an American ideal, or at least it does to me. You see the relationship in a picture like this with the, I should say, the environment, the economy. These are their workplaces, as it were. Again, is this Mexico? Is this the U.S.? What was the U.S. like before that border was there? A lot of it looked like Mexico, a lot more than it does now. Mark, whenever we've hit about 3 minutes and change, and I think we've already done that, I think we should move on. Thank you. Let's go ahead and cue Guy Greenberg's projection. Again, I really want to encourage all of you to go back and look at the full sequences because they're really fantastic. I love this picture in particular. Guy Greenberg is based in New York City. He spends much of his time photographing Hasidic communities in Williamsburg and Crown Heights in Brooklyn, which is, by the way, where I live. I live right next to the Williamsburg Satmar community that Guy is photographing here. He is all about, well, there's a strain of street photography, I think, Guy sort of like harkens back to, but it's also about portraiture, but it's also about an immersion into these communities, which is something that he clearly has done for this set of images. That picture of that young boy looking over the BQE from the pedestrian bridge, for me, really sort of echoes a lot of other historical images, equally memorable, that are connected to America's long history of immigration and assimilation. One thing you should know about these communities is that they're not particularly keen on assimilating. They're in fact keen on standing out and asserting their difference, as you can see through dress and custom. And, their festivals are utterly different from ours. And again, I can tell you this because I live right between those two communities. I'll tell you a little secret about Guy, or at least insofar as it concerns his relationship with me. He is obviously a first-rate image maker, but for a long time he was my favorite metro at my favorite local, and we began talking about his pictures, and the minute I saw them, I knew that there was something really special in these images, and he's gone on to do wonderful things and take even greater pictures, and I'm very glad now that he's selling them and out in the world and doing what he's doing with them. I don't know if I should be saying this, but I think he's now working for Joel Meyerowitz, who is obviously a master photographer, and that's exactly where he should be, and putting his work out there, because it really is just absolutely fantastic. It's one of those things. It's one of those sort of meetings or one of those encounters that one has in a place like New York City that in many ways is irreplaceable. And then I think you see in part through, Guy's own engagement with this community, right? Let's look at a couple more pictures, Mark, and then let's move on. One more. Okay, so let's move on to Woodland's slideshow. Now we're moving from the West Gallery. We've seen 3 projections to the East Gallery, right? Pardon me, from the East Gallery to the West Gallery. From the larger gallery at the museum to the smaller West Gallery, where we have 2 more slideshows. We're going to start with Woodland. Woodland is a Haitian-born artist who is now based in Syracuse, New York. She's teaching up there. Her practice, as you'll see, draws from personal history and examines race, memory, erasure, migration, immigration, and Haitian cultural identity from within the United States. Right? She uses photography, video, and installations to construct a visual language that explores notion of visibility and hypervisibility, Black feminine interiority, and selfhood. A couple of the artists gave us titles for their slideshows. Woodland was one of them. This is called Every Other Good Thing series. And it does look like every other good thing because they're largely family snapshots. I mean, Woodland took our brief literally, which was fantastic. I think most of the people, if not all of the people in her slideshow are family members. It's an extended family, obviously, spread out over a number of events. Yeah, celebratory events, regular family events, over, I think, several bits of geography. I think even there are pictures in this slideshow that are taken in Haiti. Clearly not that one, because that looks like a very American living room. The other thing that's important to say about Woodland's slideshow is that all of the images were taken with a Fujifilm disposable camera, right? So you get that sense, you get a different sort of texture to the images, a different texture to the color. They sort of sit differently on the retina and in the memory. Now, I should say, Woodland does all kinds of work. This isn't the only kind of stuff she does. And just so as a point of comparison, I'll tell you that she took a picture for the New Yorker that was the New Yorker just had her take a picture of Joe Biden. I think that was published about 2 weeks ago. Also, it was just announced that this is a very prestigious thing, an artist in residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem, which, as I say, is a very prestigious residency indeed. I imagine that's in Haiti. And I actually think it's a self-portrait. Part of what I love about these slideshows is that you can enter into these sequences of images. And again, not just get a story, but get a very personal story. Right? You get a sense of family, you get a sense of community. And it's a very different experience than we have when we generally tend to encounter images as solitary impressions. Let's go to our last slideshow, which is Curran Haddelberg. Curran is an American photographer based in Baltimore, Maryland. He's a guy who, I love this image, and that's one that we've put out in the world to basically sort of advertise this show. I think it speaks for itself, yeah? The cornfields and the flag draped over his head. He's very much influenced by the tradition of road photography. His process, as he told to me, entails driving to the US and interacting with strangers in various different locales. Some interactions last 30 minutes, others 30 days, he's told me, right? So he'll stay with these guys, for example, for 30 minutes or an hour or two, or maybe half a day, and others, he'll stay at people's homes for, up to a month or whatever. But he will engage in that way. There's a commitment to the photograph that I think is found in the openness most of the sitters, maybe except that fella, have to the camera. Right? In a way, Curran's work is kind of the germ or the beginning of this show, or at least one of the beginnings. The USF CAM team took a school trip to, I love that photo, I find that so gorgeous. The USF CAM team, as I was saying, took a school trip to New York in 2019, spring of 2019. The Whitney Biennial was on. And at the Whitney Biennial, wasn't one of the best Whitney Biennials, was it? There was on the third floor, there was a full complement, a very large exhibition of Curran's work. And I'd never heard of Curran before. And I believe neither had Margaret or Sarah Howard, who was with us, or Noel Smith. And I was just bowled over by the work. And, you know, I looked them up and found the presentation, or part of the presentation on the Whitney website, and there was the sound aspect. There was an interview with him where he said the following words, right? I'm listening to this virtually as well, come to think of it, because I'm looking at a website, or rather looking at a website and listening to his words. And he said, it's only through others that we'll really understand ourselves, our country, and our current moment. By which he means pictures of others, because that's his practice, right? And that's his commitment, to go out there and really sort of connect to others, almost in a Whitman-esque way. And I was just, he had me at that. I guess, you know, to be fully sort of revealing the other point of immediate inspiration for me for this show, and there's been many, because I mentioned that Lisa Sutcliffe really had a lot to do with getting at some of the artists, and also with, we batted around a number of ideas, and she was very generous with that. But the other sort of anchor point for me was a show that also happened in 2019 at the Brooklyn Museum, and it was a show called Gary Winogrand Color, and it was a battery, a raft of his color photographs, color slides, in fact, which had never been shown before. Winogrand was a guy who took a lot of photographs. In fact, too many. People, his own editors and curators couldn't understand how he took so many pictures. And they generally thought most of the pictures that he took were worthless. Lo and behold, they were definitively not, once people sort of like got into the archives and looked at the work. And so what this particular show at the Brooklyn Museum just managed to do was to present many of those color photographs, which had not been seen, via projection. And they projected these massive, almost walk-in images, which were just terrific to see. Anyway, I think that's it. That's it for me anyway. With the tour, maybe you have some questions that you want to ask. Yeah, I'm actually enjoying looking over these slideshows. We had a lot of fun putting the show together, and I really am immensely grateful to the staff at USF CAM for both installing this properly inside the museum and doing just an absolutely bang-up job, a cherry job, as it might say in certain parts of America, and doing it virtually. We almost had to install the show twice, actually. Okay, Mark, I think we can stop now. Thank you. So maybe there's some questions. Hiya, Dave Waterman.
I'm doing well. I enjoyed that as well. It was fun way to see those images.
Right.
Yeah. There is one question that's come in.
Shoot.
And I'll just state it as it was written. What other artists do you think are working to broaden our perspective of what America is and can be?
Oh, geez, man, that list is too long.
Good problem to have.
That is a good problem to have. I mean, so many people. Tavar Strachan, who I was just talking to Margaret Miller about, because we worked with him before. We are helping set up a large work of his in Tampa that you'll all be able to see soon enough. And he just had a major show in London at Marion Goodman that's getting an enormous amount of press. In fact, something that's coming out, I think, in the Times, I think this weekend, because I think it's T Magazine. Anyway, he's certainly somebody who's doing that. Hank Willis Thomas is somebody else who comes to mind. But really, the list is almost too long to really try to flesh out. The issue is that there are clearly artists who are trying to do that. I would include the 5 artists who are in this show, right? And of course, there are other artists who are not so interested in doing that. And I won't mention who they are right this minute, unless you ask me, and then maybe I will tell you what my opinion is about who's not doing that. If there are any other questions, I'll take them. I think my wife just put down a question that maybe is hers. But Dave, you got another question, or?
Yeah, there is another question here.
Sure.
There are a couple of questions here. Okay, a question directly about this exhibition. I'm wondering how intentional was the production and curation of this exhibit? Were all the artists working together or communicating with each other, or are these virtually unrelated bodies of work that were brought together by the museum at USF?
No, look, I mean, the process was really about Margaret and Noelle Smith were kind enough to give me a significant amount of freedom in putting the show together. So I think I can say that the show really has a great deal to do with the curator's decision to let the artists do their thing. You know, we gave them a brief, right? And it was a fairly loose brief. The idea being we knew their work, we knew where they were coming from, but so we knew that they worked with, as it were, underexposed communities. And what we wanted them to do is to give us as much of those underexposed communities as possible for today, right? To give us as much of a portrait as they could for today during lockdown, by the way. I mean, that is a significant thing to consider. We couldn't really, when we initially planned the show before lockdown, we wanted them to go out in the field and take pictures. For doing the show in September, each of us gave us a mix of pictures that they'd actually taken, and then pictures that actually culled from other pictures that they'd taken in 2019, 2018. We really couldn't ask them in March and April to go out into the field and, you know, risk their lives, take pictures. But we gave them a wide berth to interpret the brief as well as they could, and because we had great faith that the works would coalesce in the way they did, and luckily they have. What is there another question?
There's one more question. I don't know that I have the answer to this, and I might be somebody who would. Curious to hear how the attendance has been for these virtual exhibits, as I think it's a fantastic way to reach folks.
And you know what? I don't really have an answer to that.
Those stats are knowable, though. I know our tech folks do know some of that stuff. I can tell you that the concrete part of this exhibition has been our first time open, and we're being very careful about how we're letting people in, following good rules. And it's been a kind of a steady stream of folks coming through.
Well, you'd be able to answer that question, and I wouldn't, because I'm up here.
Right.
But I do know, for example, for Life During Wartime, and this was probably about 2 months ago, that we'd clocked 15,000, unique visits to the dedicated platform.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that was probably in late June. So virtually, we've gotten a lot of response, at least with that previous show. I'm sure more or less the same thing is happening now.
I've been handed texted a message from somebody who could actually look at how many people we've had come through this show in the 2 weeks we've been open. 40 people,
oh, great.
Which is, having been closed so long, I'm really pleased with that.
Good. So am I. So am
Well,
I.
I think I'm on now. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
I just say that we get a certain number of people, maybe 70, 75. Sometimes it drifts down a bit on these Zoom conferences, but then the chats or the conversations are up on our website so people can go and watch those. So by the time you accumulate different parts of audiences for different parts of the exhibition, it gets to be quite consequential. And I think that's one of the silver linings of this virtual environment, that maybe we can grow our audience and get people that aren't even in Tampa to participate.
Well, that's certainly the idea. I mean, that's the thing. You know, we're limited to what we can do physically, but the whole point of a part of the point of doing this virtually is that we can, you know, you could be in Timbuktu and you could be tuning in.
Exactly.
There's one question my wife handed me, and I don't know if it's her question or it's one that you managed to look through, David, but it's why slides? In 2020, do people use slides? Well, yeah, you know what? They use slides. They use digital slide projectors because, you know, again, that's what at least 2019, what I saw at the Brooklyn Museum, people use digital slide projectors all the time. Part of the answer to your question is that, yeah, we wanted some of the nostalgic sort of aspect of oldie timey slide projectors to sort of like kick in. I wanted not just the blank space and then the image to happen, but also the sound, you know, that thing that, like, you know, the veritable biscuit dipped in tea brings you back to another age. Now, some of you millennials, it may bring you nowhere, but I think other folks, it certainly does. Or, you know, it may bring you back to what your parents told you about the way slideshows used to work, but they really used to work to bring families or groups or, you know, 4-H clubs or whatever it was together, you know, to look at a set of images that had to do with a festival or with a birthday or, you know, a graduation or a vacation, et cetera, et cetera. Pre-Instagram, though, I'm telling you, there's still slides and slide projections. I mean, not these kinds of slides, right? These are almost out the door, though not so much that we couldn't replicate them by making the digital images into slides and showing them here. The other reason is in conversation with Kern Haddelberg, who is virtually a millennial. He really insisted that it was just an absolutely fantastic idea to do the actual slides and the slide projectors. And I was about 50-50, and he convinced me. And I think he was right. So anyway, that's it. Maybe we should quit with the questions now, and Margaret, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Well, I'm so glad that this evening took place and we got a tour of the exhibition from your vantage point, from your viewpoint as the curator. Thank you so much, Christian.
Of course, thank you.
It was illuminating and quite moving to see these images displayed this way. And I'm old enough to remember looking at family vacations on slides with all the family gathered to look at them. As a matter of fact, I'm even worried about transferring them off the slide medium into a digital environment so they're not lost. I wanted to say that for those of you who are collectors out there, the museums don't typically sell artwork from exhibitions, but we're at a moment where artists really appreciate people who are interested in their work and would certainly be interested in talking to you if you wish to purchase any of these works by these artists that you've looked at tonight. So if you just contact me or somebody on the CAM staff, we will put you in contact with the artists or their galleries, and maybe you can acquire some of their works for your collection. I wanted to mention the next event, another virtual experience with this show, will be a conversation between Christian Viveros-Faune and Lisa Sutcliffe, who we mentioned, Christian mentioned her essay during his remarks, and that's on November 5th at 6 p.m. But I just want to keep reiterating, if you could just follow us on the Contemporary Art Museum's site, all of these different events will be announced, and you certainly can let us know that you'd like to receive announcements about our virtual events and our exhibitions. We're always glad to put you on our email blast list. So thank you all for being here tonight. I'm just going to reiterate, if you happen to be in Tampa or come to Tampa, we'd love for you to walk through the show and experience the physical aspect of this exhibition. If not, set up the most optimal conditions you have at home and show this exhibition to yourself and to your family and friends. Thank you all for being with us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you on our next virtual event. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, Margaret.